The Beatles Apple billion-dollar lawsuit, that little sound right there, was born from all three. Yes, it's the alert tone that's been shipping on Mac since 1991, and it's called Sosumi. And it's literally a 30-year-old prank that an Apple engineer pulled on a team of billion-dollar lawyers, and then smuggled it into the operating system, and then hid the meaning of it for over a decade. Say the name out loud, slowly, Sosumi. So yes, sue me. Hey everyone, my name is Anya Kubo, and today we're rewinding the clock because this is one of the best engineer versus legal stories, and there's a lesson in it for every single one of us who has ever had to name something in our code. So our main character here is a man named Jim Reeks, and in the late 1980s, Jim is a sound designer and engineer at Apple, working on something called the Sound Manager in System 7, which is basically the part of the Mac that handles audio. And if you've ever used an old Mac, you've heard Jim's work. That magical startup chord when your machine powers on, that's him. The camera shutter click your iPhone still makes today when you take a photo, also him. The guy's responsible for some of the most heard sounds on planet Earth. But the one we care about today is a tiny xylophone style alert beep. And to understand why I ended up with the most passive-aggressive name in software history, we have to talk about a lawsuit. It consists of two famous companies called Apple. There's Apple Computer, the one you know, and then there's Apple Corps, the record label founded by the Beatles back in 1968. And these two have some serious beef. Back in 1978, Apple Corps sued Apple Computers over the name Apple as trademark infringement. They settled out of court, and the deal is basically fine. You can be Apple, just stay out of the music business. You do computers, we do music. Cool, except computers slowly started getting real good at music. Apple added sound chips, they added the ability to record audio, they added MIDI, the standard that lets you plug musical instruments into a computer. And Apple Corps looks at this and goes, huh? That sounds an awful lot like the music business. So they sue again. And the fallout from all of this lands directly on the desk of our engineer, Jim Reeks. Because now every single sound, every musical feature has to get reviewed by Apple's legal department, including the names. Now here's where every developer watching is going to feel a little something in their soul. Legal didn't just review the sounds, they started coming after the names of things in the code. And I mean down to the API level. Jim gets told he has to rename a command in the API. It was called Note CMD, as in musical note, to frequency CMD, because note sounded too musical. And any of you who've shipped real software know exactly why that's a nightmare. You don't just rename a public API on a whim. Other applications are depending on the name. Rename it and you break everyone's code right before a deadline, and this is the kind of thing that makes engineers lose their minds. Being told to rename a perfectly good working identifier for a reason that has nothing to do with the software and everything to do with a lawsuit. So Jim's just sitting there, frustrated, watching lawyers redefine his work, and one of his alert sounds, a little xylophone tone, originally just called xylophone, gets flagged because, you guessed it, it sounded too musical and needed a new name. And that's the moment the legend is born. Jim, half joking, completely fed up, says, fine, I'll rename the sound, I'll call it Let It Beep, which, if you know the Beatles, is a pun on Let It Be. So he's been openly mocking the lawsuit, everyone's laughing, it's a joke, and somebody goes, there is no way you'll get that past legal. And Jim shrugs and says, so sue me. And then, this is the part I love, he stops, because he realizes that's it, that's the name. He takes Sosumi, he mashes it together, and he respells it to S-O-S-U-M-I, Sosumi. And here's the genius of it, here's the actual exploit. He submits the name to the legal department in writing, never spoken out loud. He specifically asks the person dealing with the lawyers to spell it out, not pronounce it, and then tells them it's a Japanese word with no musical meaning at all. The thing is, it's not Japanese. It means nothing. He straight up lied to the lawyers' faces on paper in a way they couldn't hear the joke, and they approved it. The mockery passes legal review, and the joke is shipped. Now, think about the discipline this took, because the joke only works if no one ever finds out. So, Jim Reeks sat on this secret for over a decade. He didn't tell people what Sosumi really meant because he was genuinely worried that if the truth got out, Apple would yank the sound from the operating system to avoid stirring up a lawsuit again. So the joke just lived there quietly on millions of machines, sitting in System 7 sound menu, and then Mac OS 8, 9, OS X, every single version had a tiny xylophone beep named Sosumi, and almost nobody knew. And get this, it is still there. In modern macOS, the sound got resampled and slightly renamed to this. But the original lives on, and that little engineer's rebellion has now been riding along in the operating system for over 30 years. It has outlived the lawsuit, it's outlived floppy disk, and it will probably outlive us all. And here's the thing, Sosumi wasn't even the only time Jim did this. The iconic Mac startup chord, the big warm bong when a Mac powers on, Jim hated the old startup sound. The Mac crashed so often back then that the old tone basically became the sound of your computer just died rebooted. So he recorded a brand new one. A clean C major chord on a synth in his living room. And what did he draw inspiration from for that chord? The ending of the Beatles song, A Day in the Life. So while Apple's lawyers were fighting the Beatles in court, their own engineer was using a Beatles soundtrack as the reference for the sound on every Mac. The irony writes itself. Oh, and he didn't have permission to change the startup sound either. No, he stuck it into the boot ROM on the Mac's Quadra, so late in the project, that was when people noticed the excuse was basically, it's too risky to take out now. Pulling in my crash, something classic. And that camera shutter sound, the click your iPhone makes every time you take a photo or a screenshot, that's a recording of Jim's own 1970s Canon film camera, slowed down, billions of photo days, and it's still his own camera. Incredible. And the joke didn't just stay in the sound menu, it made it into the code base. To this day, if you go inspect the source on Apple's own product pages, the CSS class they used to style the legal fine print, the disclaimers, the tiny terms and condition text at the bottom, it's named Sosumi. Think about that. The same company's lawyers got pranked now use Sosumi as the literal class name for their legal text. The joke went from an audio file to a 30-year inside gag to a convention sitting in production CSS that front-end devs trip over to this day. The engineers won, quietly and permanently. So that's the part I want you to take away with you today. We as engineers name things all day. Variables, functions, classes, services, most of it's invisible, most of it no one will ever read, but every now and then someone slips a little bit of themselves into the code. A tiny act of rebellion that outlives the thing it was rebelling against. So the next time you're naming something in your code, maybe make it a good one. You never know, it might still be shipping in 30 years' time.